Okay, is this working? It's been a while since I've done one of these. Oh, okay. Okay. I think it's working. I'm back feeding it onto my phone to make sure because it's been a little bit of a moment. Like a little bit of a moment. Okay. All right. I think I've got it sorted. Hello. Welcome to my basement seating room. Welcome to our first live of the 2025 season. I'm very excited to be here. We've got some stuff to get through today. I am ferrying all the questions on our 2025 farm, as well as, what you guys would like to know about the retail floral shop. So I'll give it another moment, and if anybody, well, if we're waiting for people to join, cool beans. I thought that this kind of time of day would be a good time to do it. We can sit and have a chat over dinner, and hopefully have some fun that way. Now, if you are here and you're in, just, give the other direction on the screen. Just drop some happiness in the chat there so that we can all see each other. Happy to have you guys with us on this Saturday. So I guess we will get started on some of the business. So 2025, I cannot believe that we are going into our 6th full year of flower farming. It's honestly flown by. I feel a little bit like 2025, going into this year with everything, that we do know, just farm wise, but also this year, I feel like there is a lot of unknowns, and that is going to change and shape how we kind of deal with this season, right? I am sitting here in Canada today, and we are getting, the news about tariffs on our goods into the United States. And I feel like 2025 is really a year where I am not going to necessarily try a whole lot of new things, because I really want to make sure that through a changing economy, and through all of the uncertainty that's going to come with that, I want to make sure that we are able to sustain the business with what we currently have, right? And that's kind of impacted what we've chosen to grow this year. It's impacted, some of the decisions around how many staff I'm going to have on this summer. It's impacted the fact that we've straight up cut the greenhouse tulip brigade out entirely from the farm. I had big plans for 2025 to do tulips in the heated greenhouse, and unfortunately, I just think that is not going to be what I'm going to focus our energies on this spring. And that's okay. That's something that we will come back to next year. It's just, I am really doing my best as well to just read the room of what our clients are looking for with regards to flowers, and navigating our spring through a changing world, right? It's a really strange thing to be sitting here as a Canadian, and like feeling it for like my American brothers and sisters who, like, it's been a week, it's been 2 weeks, it's been 2 weeks, and it's just been so much, right? We kind of are sitting at this differently with, on the Canadian side, because there are so many things that we import into this country that, yes, some of it is from the United States, but there is also a substantial amount of stuff that we import from Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, China, like all of these other places, right? And so it is going to be, I think, an interesting year on the farm. I was really, really intentional this year about bringing all of our seeds in to Canada before January the 10th, 5th, whatever date the inauguration was. It honestly has been a whirlwind of a month, simply because there's so much we just don't know yet about how this new administration is going to, I think, impact the agricultural world that we live in. So that's kind of like, we're just really not taking, I think, any chances in that light. And that's okay, right? Like, that it's going to be very much a like back to basics kind of year. So like in that way, we are, I didn't add the perennials into the farm that I was hoping to add this year. My plan originally was to bring in Baptisia, Veronica, more hydrangea. I had a huge list of things that I wanted to bring in this fall, or this past fall, made the decision not to do that. And like this spring, we're cutting our greenhouse tulip project out. Realistically, most of the tulips that we are, growing and using in the store anyways this time of year are not imported. They are Canadian greenhouse tulips. They're coming down to us from Niagara. We are 2.5 hours away from the main flower market in the province. And so we are in a bit of a unique position, I think, in where I am located in the country, that I have access to a ton of local growers, not just like small flower farms, but also like large agricultural flower farms, that this is what they do all the time. So if you happen to follow us on Instagram, you'll notice that we use a lot of things this time of year, things like tulips, things like snapdragons, stock, alstroemeria, gerbera daisies, lilies. Those are all Canadian grown products. Those are all Canadian grown flowers. Most of them are grown right here in Ontario. So it is nice to have that as, a supplementary option for the floral shop during the winter months. And it does definitely, I think, give us a little bit of a breathing room when we're thinking about how some of these, our products being tariffed going into the States, and then the potential trade wars that are going to come off of that. We can breathe a little bit easier, right? There's a lot of uncertainty right now as to how all of this is going to affect the floral industry. We are sitting kind of in a spot where Canada has, trade deals with Colombia and Ecuador specifically. So when it comes to things like roses, carnations, greenery, all of that stuff that's coming up from South America, really, unless it's probably making a pit stop somewhere in the States, like Florida for like fuel, it's coming straight into Toronto from that country of origin. And so we may not actually see a huge change on the cost of those stems outside of the actual fuel used for the planes to get it here, right? There's a lot of moving parts. We don't know 100% how that's going to look. The main thing I am expecting to see a rather large increase on, because it is an American grown stem this spring, is probably going to be peonies. Peonies, there's a ton of peonies that are grown in the United States. If you have followed our story, at least this past year, you know that Southwestern Ontario specifically is starting to see warmer and warmer springs. We had our entire peony season last year bloom out in 3 weeks. So by the time June 10th came around last year and my June brides were really looking for those peonies, we did not have local peonies anymore at that point. So they were all being imported from other parts, whether it was the Netherlands or whether it was Alaska. None of those peonies at that point were local. So the shop aspect of the flower farm, I think, makes it a little bit more difficult because we are very heavily into event floral. I can do the work this year. So like right now I've got like stock beside me, seedlings that are getting potted up because we are growing a lot of stock and snapdragons, bupleurum, cornflower. So like bachelor's buttons, orlea, nigella, campanula, all of those like really beautiful spring blooms, ranunculus, butterfly ranunculus, anemones. But the reality is that because we own a store, I do have to have access. The expectation really from this area that I'm in Ontario, which is very like small town, flower farms, all of those things, we're going to see a bit of a change. So like, I just, I know that a lot of my customers around this area definitely expect, more traditional floristry. So like it's a very slow process of like getting them used to more like aggressively trendy designs with local flowers. And so I will always carry a good rose in my store because they are beautiful flowers and people love them. It doesn't negate from having supplementary blooms from our flower farm because I do that. So I just kind of wanted to open with that because the tariff conversation really it's a big one. It's a big one here in Southwestern Ontario right now because I'm 45 minutes from the border. Joseph's having dinner. There's so much uncertainty, right? So we are really trying to figure that out with our suppliers, but those announcements just came down today. I'm not freaking out about them yet, but I am also hopeful because there is so many local flowers that you can purchase in this area year round, right? There are flower farmers, whether they're like small independent farmers or large agricultural farmers, they're all over Ontario. So it feels good to have those options, and it feels great as a retail florist and flower farm as well to be able to support other growers. I think those networks are important regardless of what country you are in. And like I said, we do get blooms in from the Netherlands. We will get stuff in from South America. Very rarely are the flowers that I'm using in the store actually grown in the United States. And so I'm like more expecting to see that, like the implications of that, I think, on, like I said, peonies, but also some of our houseplants that we get in, likely hard goods, the stuff that's coming over from China and, dropping off at the depots somewhere in the States and then getting shipped up to Canada. That's kind of where I'm expecting we're going to see those, because it's going to be the cost of fuel that is going to affect, I think, the pricing of goods more so than the hard goods cost themselves, if that makes sense. I could be totally out to lunch here because things are changing so quickly that it might change again by Monday, and all of this is going to be obsolete because that's just the current age of information we seem to be living with, and nobody knows what the next steps are. So with regards to the farm, the first question that I had, so thank you for the couple questions that I got. I'm going to, I think, start with soil blocks because we start everything in soil blocks this year. My soil blocks for my Lisianthus are just like covered in moss. It's fine. I could have put vermiculite over them if I wanted to. I didn't want to. There's vermiculite in the soil blocks. We'll just pot them up at some point and it'll be fine. I do have chat going, so if you have any questions, comments, definitely, post over there. Don't forget to, like the stream if you're following along and enjoying the conversation. Love that. But I wanted to start that conversation with soil blocks. So currently on my seed shelf, behind me, flip it around. Oh, look, there are seeds. We have all of our trays of Lisianthus started. So I have about 700 Lizzie seeds in. We're growing, I think, about 8 different varieties of Lisianthus this year. The first succession is almost completely up, despite the moss, up they come. those I will let develop into the let's see, probably the second set of leaves before we move those into from the soil blocks that they're in and bump them up into just like a 4x4 tray, right? These trays, right? We can have a love-hate relationship with plastic. That's fine. But these trays are going on their like 5th year at the flower farm. We have been using these since almost the very beginning. I got them like probably hundreds of them in a bag from a local consignment store or like a secondhand store. Amazon drivers. Sorry, we have 3 dogs now. Several years ago, I think I got all of them for about $10. One of the local greenhouses was closing. They donated them off. So we have been using these and reusing these and washing these and bleaching these and continuing to use what we have year after year because this is what is accessible to me. They're so noisy. It's not cost effective for me at this exact moment in my farming career to go out and buy a ton of like seed trays because we like the big ones. One second, we're gonna deal with the noise here. It's not useful for me to use those big ones, like the big trays yet, simply because I have these and they work great. It's just another like plasticky thing, and that's fine. We will take, right now we've got some stock, some little baby stocks sitting in the soil blocks, and these guys are coming on to like seedling 2. I'm actually going to start potting these up pretty soon. Oh, she's so annoying. I'm so sorry. The Amazon driver or a dog walked by, and Isabel has to let the whole neighborhood know that it's our house. So these guys were starting to actually put into higher blocks because I am starting to see some of the like roots come out the bottom there. And I will put 2 of them in per. Honestly, I'm so sorry. So sorry. So we use this process for our stock. We use them for our snapdragons. We use them for our eucalyptus. We use it for campanula, for bupleurum. I know that technically a lot of farmers will like direct seed your buplurums, your orleas, your nigellas. I go through the hassle of sitting down every single year and like individually seeding them into the soil blocks. The reason I do that is because I like numbers. So this year, I get really excited about the organization aspect of all of this, right? Love the organization. So this year, what I actually did was create a huge master spreadsheet. And in the past, we've done the larkspur and stuff like in the fall and just like dump the whole seed packing over. And the one thing I will still have to do that with yet is the bachelor's buttons in the spring. But I have been working really hard on creating a master seed starting list. So this here is I use a Google template for this. And it has all of the information. So like the seeding dates, the like variety, what it looks like, the color. As you scroll over, how many were seeded. All of our staff have access to this through like their emails. And so if they're out on the farm and we are, potting something up or putting something into the ground, we are keeping track on here of exactly what was seeded, how many were seeded, extra notes, harvest instructions, germination, and all of that. So I have one going right now for like here at the top is like all the Lysianthus. And then we also have like as we go down, so I've been working on like the eucalyptus, the exact varieties that we're growing, and actually keeping track of the germination rates on that as well. I think that is really, really important. So yeah, I'm like trying to get really organized. I've done something similar for weekly tasks. And so when we get to the farm, there's like a task checklist as well with initials of like who has done it. And this includes really basic things. So back to the soil blocking, really basic things like I've now up potted the soil block into its new container. How many out of the 100 soil blocks of that particular variety actually made it to germination? And then from that, we are able to look at kind of like the decrease rate, and figure out where and how and potentially why different seedlings are not making it to full growth. So a great example of this, like you've heard me kind of talk extensively about in my love-hate relationship with the floret zinnias, trying to figure out why they didn't do well. Was it at the germination stage? Was it when they got into the field? Were they not planted at the right time? Were the successions mixed up? And so a lot of what we're trying to do this year is we've got new team members again. We've got, an additional greenhouse going up. Things are getting moved around on the farm, is figuring out exactly like the whys and the hows as to like kind of where, things are, right? And like where stuff is getting lost along the way. So with the soil blocking, what I've actually done is they're handy dandy little soil blocking, because these are 20 squares, right? So there's 20 in each cell here. What we do is one row is one variety and one row is another variety, and then label them on the outside. I know right off the bat there's 100 seeds in here, and I don't have to count this again when I'm potting stuff up into like the next section. So like every single time I work through soil blocking, every single time I work through soil blocking, we know exactly how many seeds are there, which is great. Jane, I just saw your chat there about storing peony buds. We did that. So this is our third year with the peonies in the ground. So last year was kind of like a base harvest, kind of like figuring out exactly how many stems we were going to get from the plants, leaving like the 30% on the plants. We moved through the peonies. So I think I harvested I counted about 350 stems that we pulled off of the peonies last year. And between our markets, our weddings, them just blooming so fast and having to move, we were out of peonies long before we could get to them. I dry stored some of them last year because I had a few of them that we needed to push to a wedding in June, specifically like the middle of June, specifically for a bride. But the heat wave that came through, that was I believe, third week of May, as we were trying to get the dahlias out into the field, and then it poured rain. There was a whole video on that. We didn't have enough. And so, yes, gladly store. But we didn't have enough stems last year from what we had been growing in order to be able to do that. There are farmers that do, but really peony season is so fast here because it gets so warm so quickly that even storing them, they might have a 3-day base life. And so for peonies, a lot of the time, we're just working on we're using those for event floral and for like some market stuff. And that is about the extent of what I am able to get from peonies. And some of that's just like climate insecurity, right? It's just having to figure out year over year what we're able to, store for future use. And this is the same thing with tulips. We had a huge loss on some of the tulips this year. Last year, the coolers, refrigeration fans broke. And so we had a huge crop loss on tulips, which was really unfortunate. But again, we dry store those bulb on so that we can, keep them going in the cooler for up to 4 weeks, which is great. It got very warm very quickly in May. And then by the end of June, cooled off a little bit. So a lot of crops really suffered for that because that's not normal for the climate that I'm in. Anyways, that's a whole separate thing. It's going to take, I think, some joint effort from a lot of very smart people to figure out how to deal with some of these just like global insecurities and climate insecurities going forward. So anyways, back to the soil blocks. It makes it very easy for me to just like know exactly what my germination rates are, right? When we work things out of 100, it's like the percentages are very easy to figure out, right? Because percent literally means per 100. So if I have 4 stock plants that didn't germinate, I know that my germination rate was 96%, and that is great. Same thing with, it gets a little bit more difficult when I have like seed packs that are, like there's at least 50 from Johnny and this specific eucalyptus thing. So those ones I have to count it a little better because there's like 62 gunny eucalyptus seeds and I got to figure out what that is going to be. And so that requires math for my English brain, and that's fine. That's what spreadsheets and equations are for. We're lucky that we live in a world where the computers will do some of those things for you. So yeah, so most of those things, Lisianthus is about the only thing that we really hold back on potting up into larger either soil blocks or little trays. The Lisianthus just, again, it takes so much longer, which is why I feel like a bloody superhero every time my Lisianthus blooms each year. We currently have our greenhouse snapdragons started. So those are in their soil blocks. They are germinated. I think I'm at about a 95% germination rate on those. So we're going to let those get to probably when the roots are growing out the bottom of the soil block before we pot those up. This is just our first year doing stock, and I know that I want to get that out into the new greenhouse. So we have a second greenhouse that's about, I think, 8 feet across, whereas the big one is 14 feet across, 10 feet across maybe. Anyways, I got to measure them. The stock is going to go in the second greenhouse. And so that one still needs plastic. It's on the to-do list yet for February. But my March 1st, my goal is to have those stalks planted out with good root systems already in their containers. And it just, again, for my brain, makes it really easy to do the math and to figure out like the loss in different places as we go down the line. A lot of this year is going to be note-taking, deep diving into why things aren't doing well, looking at different parts of the farm and like the pH levels in soil. We do actually need to properly get the soil tested this year. It's going to be this year, the farmer that we rent the field from, the cash crop that's going in there is corn, which creates a completely different microclimate than growing soybeans because corn is considerably taller, which means that we will be getting even less airflow through the farm. And so we are going to be doing things like spacing the zinnia plants out further so that we can hopefully get ahead of some of the powdery mildew and dark spot issues that we saw in that patch. They'll be at a different part of the farm this year, and resting certain parts of the farm that have, been worked for the last couple years. And moving some of the crops into parts of the farm that haven't been worked. And so this past year, you'll have seen, like in 2024 on the videos, you'll have seen, the area that we were driving the vehicles around, kind of between the greenhouses and the dahlias. Well, this year, we are actually moving that path to the other side of the dahlias. And so we're going to be gaining like at least like 10 to 14 feet there that we're going to be able to put long rows in beside where the cosmos were. So there are some like really interesting things happening. We do start most of our starts. I think the only thing that I don't start pre-sprout in soil blocks are the large seeded annuals like zinnias. Doesn't make any sense because they come up so fast and they get so big that they just root out of their soil blocks so fast. We don't put marigolds in soil blocks. We don't typically do cosmos in soil blocks because, again, big beefy seedlings, they just go so fast. And I don't typically do like status in soil blocks either. I just find that some of those seeds are too big for the block themselves, and they grow out of them so fast. Now, I also prefer to use these because the soil is more aerated in these. I find that the large, so these little guys are great, right? When you're just starting the seeds, I find that the large ones pack a lot of dirt into them. I can make my soil mixtures actually go a lot farther and stuff like this because there's more aeration in the soil. And so I do use a considerably less amount of dirt in my 4 squares than I do in my like actual like large, I think there's like 8 squares in that. The only thing I will use those for is the eucalyptus. I find it's really helpful to have the eucalyptus rooted like really well in those large soil blocks. We did try the larkspur in those this past year for the greenhouse because I know larkspur doesn't like to have its roots touched and messed with very much, but honestly, for me, there was no like really big difference between the ones that we had done in these and in the greenhouse versus the ones that were in like the larger soil blocks. That was just my experience. The other thing is that we don't use like perfectly flat trays for our soil blocks. So you can see that we still have like all of the ones here that are ridged. I actually, if you can get them to balance, there's a very specific way that you can get them to like balance on here, where you can use those ridges as like the sides of where your soil blocks are going to go. So it actually like keeps everything together. These are really handy little like trenches for your water for bottom watering. And if you can get those balanced, I know people like to just have them on like the pizza trays and the cafeteria trays because they're nice and easy. But I have found that this is a great way to use like traditional potting mix and vermiculite and like peat moss together kind of in one, while also not having to worry too much about your soil blocks like disintegrating underneath of you because the water, they're actually soaking up the water from below. It also works. And like this is a block these were soil blocked Monday, I think. We're on Saturday now, so I just haven't gotten to seeding these yet. I was going to put lupins in here, and then I threw them up in the fridge to like cold stratify and germinate on a paper towel. They will go in here, but because they have like the ridging underneath, I'm able to like put a good inch of water in here, and I only have to water these like every other day because they're like sucking the water up from below. So I find that really handy. That's just a little trick I've learned over the years because I don't want to go buy cafeteria trays, and we have the flat trays that we use for these anyways. So in the interest of being, a little bit of cost effective and ingenious, it's fine. That's kind of what I've decided to go through there. So that's kind of the plan for the farm. A lot of our spring tender annuals, a lot of that seeding is getting moved into the greenhouse, like the large greenhouse at the farm this year. Some of the stuff that I have that is going to need to acclimate between, being in the basement here and going out to be planted in the greenhouse. The little mini tunnel that's in our backyard here in town, that is going to be kind of like our seed place, which is another reason why we're not doing greenhouse tulips in there. This year is I just want to be able to have something that's close and stable to muck around with some of my seeds, like my indoor seeds. I can heat that easily because it runs off of the hydro from the house, as my husband has moved all of the never-ending supply that he seems to continue to have of Amazon solar panels that he continues to hook up to generators that then heat the greenhouse. Marry an engineer. It's things happen. But regardless, that means that all of the heaters that are going to be running into the back greenhouse here at our house are actually going to be running off of hydro from the garage. So like, it's fine. We just, reallocating resources to other places for the time being while we figure out more permanent solutions for stuff. So if there's any other like farm related questions, I can kind of get into those now. I was also had some questions about the flower shop and kind of ratios around like imported versus the flowers that we specifically used from our farm in there. And so I wanted to get into that a little bit as well. And we have Eleanor who's joined us and is very vocal. Hey, where are you? Very vocal about her need for lovin's right now. Hi, sweetie. Okay. So for the flower shop, retail floral, let's talk about it. So we have now had one full year open in the flower shop. We opened the shop back in April of 2023. So 2024 would have been our first full year open from January until until December. And wow, what a year it was. The great thing about having one full year under my belt is that I can look back now at trends and ordering from last year and have an idea of what um, what we can expect kind of in like future years and kind of for this year, right? So from the retail floral perspective, I talked a little bit about this already with the tariffs. We bring in everything. So what I've learned this year is that the couples that are shopping with us, specifically for like wedding and event work, are not just shopping with us because of the flower farm. The flower farm is an added benefit for stability, but realistically, what I'm actually seeing, she's in the Johnny's box. It's like that's her box. She sleeps in there. Really, really what we see actually a lot of time is the couples that are choosing us for their flowers are choosing us for design. So I have done everything this year from like working with tropicals, anthuriums, monstera leaves, which was one really protea, which was a really cool bouquet, mixed that in with local dahlias and zinnias, all the way to like peonies and ranunculus and roses and like really traditional like white and blush weddings. I am obsessed with the look of a rose that has reflexed petals. I think that is one of the most elegantly beautiful like variations on a flower to be able to, as like a florist, to like manipulate those petals back to like open that rose. I think it is stunning. Um, I I can understand that there is, a lot of conversation to be had around the impact of the global flower industry, and how, the focus on local being better. Great. I understand from the perspective of like immediacy. Yes, shopping local is always better. But I think with something like flowers, it is important to recognize that like the industry as a whole, horticulture as a whole, is deeply linked with the British Empire and colonization. It is also deeply linked with creating, Ecuador and Colombia, for instance, with the rose greenhouses, was a export and farming identity that was kind of given to them in order to help combat some of the cartel problems in like the 90s, right? I'm from a part of Ontario where I remember growing up with rose greenhouses like 15 minutes up the road from where I lived. And in like the late 90s, those closed, picked up, and moved down to like South America and Central America. It's not really all that great to be growing long-stemmed florist roses in the part of the country that I live in. We do not get enough sunlight in the winter, so you end up having an insane amount of light pollution. Plus, it's cold here, and roses really do not like that. And so again, with these large greenhouses spending that much amount of money to, heat these greenhouses, like the light pollution and the gas pollution from that is not necessarily doesn't offset the fuel pollution that is used to bring those roses up to us. So like, I love Ontario rose season. Garden rose season for us is like the middle of June, usually until about the middle of July. And I will take every variety of Ontario grown rose that I can possibly get my hands on. It's not feasible yet for us to put in a lot of roses on the farm, and that's totally okay. But I love Ontario roses, and I'm always going to love Ontario roses. I have climbing roses at my house that are some of like the most beautiful hot pink roses I've ever seen. If they're not varieties that are available anymore. But I do think, it's really easy to like demonize is maybe not the right word, but like put our noses up a little bit at like the products coming in from South America, but not say the same thing about like the products coming in. So like wax flower is a great example because most of that comes in for us from Australia. We get tulips, ranunculus, anemones, campanula. I've had Nigella come in from the Netherlands for a bride who really wanted it because it meant something, but Ontario season, it was gone. And so like we'll go that mile for our clients because I am very sentimental, and I had black-eyed Susans in my wedding bouquet because my grandpa grew them. And florists told me they're not going to look great, and they didn't by the end of the day, but that's okay. I think that the global horticulture world is incredibly intertwined, and so much research is happening in so many different parts of the world that it does absolutely, affect all of us, right? The Association of Specialty Cut Flowers is bigger than just tiny local flowers. They visit places that are not just North America, right? And a lot of the work that's being done at developing new varieties of things are being done by like Dutch scientists and farmers. The Dahlia initiative's happening in California with Christine Albright, like those, is she in California? West Coast, is like miles ahead of, stuff that's happening here, like in Southwestern Ontario, but it all has to do with climate. You can't have everything in every place, but we all get obsessed with all of these different types of flowers and want to learn to grow them. And then you have to also think about what the environmental impact is of, like, for me, keeping my eucalyptus alive as a small farmer, that we had to pull out our gas generators for to survive the Arctic, like, airflow that came down and, like, gave snow to Florida like a week ago. There's no great answer to that question, and our business is not built to be an exclusive flower farm, right? My flower farm supplements my shop. And even though I started this journey just exclusively growing, we started exclusively growing because in 2019, we had planted something like 500 tulips because my husband and I are both from like a Dutch background and obsessed with tulips because it's in our blood. When the pandemic happened in 2020 and the entire global floral industry shut down, we were the only people in town that had flowers, and I sold out of tulips in like 10 minutes on like my Facebook page. That's how this started. And I think that's a pretty like common like story for a lot of the flower farmers, like the small little flower farmers that you're seeing pop up on like social media and on YouTube. And like that's okay. That's a great story. That's a great way to start. But I think that the next step of that is how can we make wise choices in what the product that we're putting out of our shop, to meet a 50% ratio of like local flowers every week. It doesn't necessarily mean that arrangement specifically is going to have a 50% local flower stock in it, but it does mean that overall my cooler at the store is usually filled with about 50% of local flowers year round. The only exception to that is typically around Christmas. And that's specifically because normally in Ontario, we would supplement like greeneries with like evergreens and like local spruce and pine and all of that kind of stuff. But my area has been hit really, really bad with a caterpillar borer that is just absolutely decimating our cedar population. It's awful. And so much of the cedar that we're using right now is actually like imported from the US in like our Christmas arrangements, right? So Christmas is kind of about the only time of year that I don't have 50% like flowers in my cooler. This week, we, all of our spikes, so our snapdragons, our stock, bells of Ireland is greenhouse grown in Ontario right now. We're kind of like Ontario has year-round lilies. We have year-round ranunculus. One of the biggest ranunculus growers in all of Ontario is 2 hours from me. And they grow the most beautiful ranunculus you have ever seen in your life. And I've definitely used their ranunculus many a time. Gorgeous. They also are the primary anemone growers. We have dahlia growers that start coming out usually the end of July. We start seeing local dahlias at the Toronto Flower Market. I had local campanula in last week. It was grown, probably around the Niagara region because there's a ton of stuff that is grown like literally 2 hours from where I live. It's where all of the huge greenhouses are. It's where a lot of Ontario's produce is grown as well. If you look at a map of Ontario, we are like in the Great Lakes basin there. So like when you look, if you're trying to like figure it out, I'm in Strathroy. London is probably like the closest big city if you're just to type in London, Ontario on a map. That's kind of around where I am. So it's literally just like if we're here and like the lakes kind of like come around here, like Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, oh my gosh, are like up here. Toronto's here, we're here, right? So it's just a straight shot down the highway, like to bring the flowers down. It's not that far. And so there's a lot of the growers that are like up in that area as well. The Alstroemeria grower, like one of the biggest Alstroemeria growers in all of Ontario, literally shares a parking lot with my wholesaler. Like it doesn't get any more local than that for me. He also grows hydrangea. Like there's a network of existing farmers, like large agricultural flower farmers in this area from like back in the 80s and 90s that are still growing and supporting each other. And the Ontario Flower Association, or the Ontario Flower Growers, is actually an association that's a part of the larger Toronto flower market that is just exclusively local flower farmers. A good friend of mine who we do also purchase her blooms and bring them into the store. She just started selling her heirloom mums up at the Ontario Flower Growers Association, the Ontario Flower Growers. And she's done great with that. It's a product that's needed, right, in a larger scale. And so I'm super happy for her. We've brought her mums into the store in the fall, and they are some of the most beautiful like heirloom spider mums I think I've ever seen. However, she has the infrastructure to grow those and grow them well. And I do not. So I am not actually interested in doing that. I'm all about the Lisianthus this year. We are going to be growing the Lisianthus this year because I'm absolutely fascinated with this crop. My love of dahlias really is kind of subsiding, but that's a whole different conversation. So like, yeah, farm to wholesale. We this year for Valentine's Day, so I just released that video, like, what was it? This yesterday, maybe, that kind of went over like a very basic rose arrangement, right? The triangle. That is an arrangement style that I use for every single mixed vase arrangement that goes out of our store. And it's really just a matter of like switching out that center stem with something else. Snapdragon looks great. And you just kind of like spiral your way around to create those different layers. But I mean, like, you can use that for Gerbera daisies. That's all local. We've done it before. I've done it before with ranunculus, although ranunculus, I find their stems are not quite as long and as stable as like a long-stemmed rose. Sunflowers in the summer, that's a great option for a sunflower arrangement. Looks fabulous with solidago. So it really like depends on the time of year too. Right now in January, February, I have local tulips. I have daffodils, haven't even started yet. So we don't have narcissus. We don't have hyacinth, any of those yet. Usually after Valentine's Day, I'll start to see like local pussy willow, local curly willow. We will see like local hyacinth come on. And actually, I provide a lot of the local hyacinth and the local daff to my wholesaler. I got really lucky where they live extremely close, like 5 minutes across town. I'm in a very unique situation, right? Like I understand entirely that my situation with flowers and like linking up with a wholesaler is not the norm. And it's just because of where I'm located. I went to elementary school with one of the main delivery drivers, and it's his family that owns it. So I had a little bit of an in there as well, which was very helpful. But they're like, I don't grow hyacinth for the store. I don't sell it in the store. What I do is sell it to the wholesaler. And they bring those stems, my stems of hyacinth, to florists all across Southwestern Ontario. I mostly grow the daffodils for myself because I'm a little obsessed with the specialty daffodils. I think they're one of my favorite spring flowers. They're not my customer's favorite, but they're my favorite. And I will move a ton of the basic white or not the white, the yellow, like regular daffodils to the wholesaler in the spring. You know, I don't necessarily sell most of my ranunculus goes out through the store and the farmers markets or my flower subscriptions. It doesn't go to the wholesaler because they purchase already from the grower that's in Toronto. And it's just because that grower has like crazy amounts of greenhouses and they have the art of ranunculus down pat. They grow beautiful ranunculus. And my ranunculus, even though it's still like the Cloney and Elegance series, it's just not comparable. When you have year-round heated greenhouses growing ranunculus in a climate that's like perfect, other than probably July and August is really when we don't see them, and then they're imported from the Netherlands, you're going to get them from the best, and that's totally fine. However, I sell an incredible amount of bachelor's buttons to my wholesaler. I sell an incredible amount of Orlea, strawflower, Nigella we move, Bupleurum, the Campanula goes. But I don't sell things like snapdragons because my snapdragons are not greenhouse grown, like traditional greenhouse grown. They are field greenhouse or field grown. And so the stems aren't as perfectly straight as the florists want them. But those I can move to event florists. And so I do also have a small network of like local florists to me who are, you know, people I've met and befriended in the industry, and they're also purchasing stems from us. And so it's really hard. My goal always during off season is about a 50-50 like ratio and kind of like supplement percentage. But like I was talking about earlier, I'm a sucker for a good garden rose. One of my absolute favorite roses that we use in the store is Quicksand. She's this just beautiful kind of like blushy, like almost the color of my phone, but like dustier. And it's got a lovely scent to it, and it's just not comparable. Like there's nothing like that. We are doing like like half dozen garden rose bunches for Valentine's Day with local eucalyptus. Because it's kind of the best of both worlds for Valentine's, and they're all designer like long stem roses. We're not doing the like, you know, freedoms and like traditional Vendella white roses. I like to bring in the ritzy stuff because that's more in line with my brand, is some of those higher end, whimsical, wispy, kind of like interesting blooms. But I also think like, I don't know, it's an interesting business model. So, you know, I do also bring flowers in from other farms as well, because that was another part of that question. So my friend Caroline, and I've actually like shown you guys her farm, I think on my channel. I think the video is back from like 2023 maybe. She grows beautiful ranunculus, and normally she has it before anybody else. She's also the one growing the heirloom mums. Love to bring in stuff from her. I've also sourced from my friend Janice, who's about 45 minutes in the other direction, because she again grows a whole bunch of things that I don't grow, because she has like 14 plus acres that are just her own, and she has been flower farming for 10 years. The woman is incredible. So those networks are super important. I've got some smaller growers as well that are like close, very close to me, like literally up the road close to me, where their successions will sometimes start later than mine. So a great example is this year, my Bupleurum I had put out in the greenhouse. We didn't do a second succession planting outside. Heather had Bupleurum for me when I needed it in July, because mine was all finished by the last week of June. So it's like those types of relationships I think are really important in this industry, because it can be an incredibly lonely industry. I'm lucky that I kind of get to have the best of both worlds, where I get to spend time, you know, front facing with my customers and designing, but also the time weeding, organizing, seeding, soil blocking, and all of those other things as well. And it's very like scheduled and structured in the way that I do that. And then we've also come to understand, because we have a special needs child who does require like a lot of our attention. He requires full-time care, and we do not have care for him during the day outside of the school days. It's very much of a like, everything has to be very regimented and very scheduled to make sure it can get done. And we also know that we need help in order to be able to make it happen. So like we this year now have moved from having 4 like 2 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff down to 2 full-time staff, and then 1 additional, we call her our mega weeder, that comes in the evenings and does some extra weeding at the farm. And then moved over all of our deliveries for our store deliveries over to a driver that I hire like additionally, who comes in every day and like Tuesday to Friday, because we're open Tuesday to Saturday. Saturday's usually not a heavy delivery day for us, but he will come in during the week and then do all of our local deliveries. We schedule our like out of town deliveries typically 1 day a week, so that we're not running around, outside of our immediate area, because where I live, there's a lot of small towns, and very quickly a like 5-kilometer route that's supposed to be within your small town can turn into 120 kilometers, because you're delivering here and then here and then here and then here, because the closest big city to us is 30 minutes away. And that's just the reality of like of owning a flower shop, to be honest. So it's kind of like the summertime, we definitely have a lot more flowers that are ours. This year, I have kind of changed the way I'm growing the farm, so that the stuff that we are growing at the farm are stems and blooms that I know we have success with out of our farm, success with through the wholesaler, and success with in our floral subscriptions. They're the ones that we've gotten really good feedback. I am, like I said, love-hate relationship with dahlias this year. I love dahlias. I think that they're beautiful blooms. Growers care more about them, so much more than the customers do. When I get a picture from a florist of like a specific dahlia she's looking for the color. She's not looking for like that specific variety. And I'm kind of realizing that the ones I need to, focus on are the ones that we utilize for arrangements in Thanksgiving. And then like my blush Sweet Natalie and Cafe au Laits and Boom Boom Whites. And then I'm going to keep Bodacious, because she's a good producer and sells really, really well at the farmer's market. But the reality is that a lot of the dahlias that are on the market are not dahlias I don't need hundreds of. And some of those I can now move, I think, into my home gardens and just enjoy for myself. I'm done unicorn shopping for dahlias this year. I actually haven't ordered any new dahlia tubers at all, which is the first time in probably 7 years I haven't ordered dahlia tubers. So that feels really, really, really weird. Super weird. Yes, Jane, I will have like so many more peonies in 3 to 5 years. We planted 100 more coral charm peonies this past fall. Coral charm is an interesting peony because it's just a single layer of petals, right? So when it opens, it's got this like really beautiful pollen center to it. It's one of the earliest peonies that's on the market here. It blooms out very quickly. Coral, peach, and blue is still such a popular color combination for weddings, and I think it's going to be for a little bit, although we're starting to see some like purples and pastels kind of move into that as well. That it's a really good one to have on. And the lucky thing with keeping peonies in the farm, I think long term, is that it is money. It is one we will make money off of later, but oh my goodness, they are so much work for a very short period of time. I did try and plan out my peony field so that they weren't all blooming at the same time. And last year, Mother Nature had a completely different idea, and just gave us the hottest weather for 2 weeks straight. And that was what we got. So those were, it took me a full hour to answer those 2 questions, but as I do, I tangent. So always ask questions, because I think this year needs to be as much of a conversation with other growers, with other gardeners, people who are just here to like enjoy the party. I think that this year for me specifically with the channel, just needs to be about showing up. I get lost a lot of times in the comparison game where you see the blooms and the farms from the other YouTubers. Like I am obsessed with watching North Lawn Flower Farm. I love watching her content. Her gardens are some of the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. But flower farms are not like that, right? Like they're dirty and they're messy and there's stuff laying everywhere and it's not landscaped because it's for production. And I think part of it is that I just need to learn to show up better this year for you guys, for the community, and to, I think, have more conversations. Going into 2025, I know for a fact that one of the things that I do want to share with you is the design aspect of like the flower farm and floristry world, right? A whole part of my business model is retail floral design. And so I think, along with bouquet wrapping, which is a video that I'm going to be filming this upcoming week and putting out again before Valentine's Day, because if you are giving flowers away or selling flowers or, just starting out, I think that's a great, just like basics videos to have. Things like arrangement making and like the cost breakdown on that. It was important to me that I did that for you guys at the end. But I also want to be able to share this year some of the behind the scenes. So like if spreadsheets interest you, I want to give you access to a spreadsheet that you can plunk your own information in and, figure that out on your own. I like enabling people to be able to learn things themselves. And like the crutch side of that is that, you lose people along the way because they go off and find their own way and do their own things. And that's something I've had happen multiple times throughout, hiring staff and seeing them go off to start their own businesses with information and ways that I've taught them. And that's literally just part of the industry. But I also think that in some ways that empowerment is a superpower. And I would like, to be able to have more of you guys empowered in that way. I love spreadsheets. I'm learning so much about spreadsheets. I have a degree in English and history, so like we rarely use spreadsheets. I wrote a lot of essays. I could tell you a lot of things about, pages and word programs. A little less on the spreadsheets. So yeah, it's part of it. I think this year is it's going to be showing up. The videos might not be long, but I'm hoping that they're going to be here. I want to be able to show you more of the beauty and the cool stuff that's going on at the farm, but also some of the failures, right? Like when you miss so much of the year and you get so tired with just everything that has happened and the like emotionally draining and 16 weddings in, 6 weeks, which was a lot. You miss the part of the farm season where, we completely lost our crop of Dara at the end of July this year. I have no idea what happened because the Queen Anne's lace, the Amni, looked fabulous. The Dara just decided it was going to die. And it was all of it. It was the stuff that had reseeded itself, and it was also the brand new stuff that we had put in. And I don't know if part of that was because it had started blooming earlier. Normally, I have Dara going straight until frost, right? So when I was planning weddings and we were looking at all of these like brown colored flowers that we could put in, I ended up having to bring Dara in from the flower markets because I didn't have any. I had dead pods, and it was the most bizarre thing I think I have ever experienced in like my 6 years of growing flowers. We had a complete crop failure on amaranth this past year, and I honestly think it's because it was too hot. The seedlings couldn't get going. I cannot for the life of me get the like long trailing amaranth to like look great. But then I look at like Florists and Farms out in like Langley, and hers was beautiful because it's just a much more temperate climate. And that's the other thing with dahlias is they're becoming a little bit more like finicky to some things to grow. Dahlias specifically, we're seeing a like much slower season for dahlias, but a longer season, and then they're annoying to get out before the tulips come in. We're seeing, things like bloom times on our like Sunflowers is a great example. So if I have like a pro-cut sunflower that's supposed to have 50 days, it's blooming in 30, which is crazy. Like that is almost half the time. And then it makes it really hard to crop plan for different things because the climate's just doing whatever it wants and there's no consistency through it. It's almost to the point now where we are seeing an absolute downtick on like event planning in July and like the first half of August here because the weather is just too unbearably hot. And people are not booking like their weddings anymore. We're seeing so many more weddings booked April, May, June, a break in July and August, which is annoying because that's when my flowers are blooming. And then seeing a uptick of them again in September and well into October. And honestly, we did a wedding in November this past year, which I've never done. And I still had farm grown flowers from the greenhouse for that. So, Lisa. Oh, I'm so glad that this is helpful into the wholesale side. First of all, I'm going to say I love using herbs in flowers. Or in arrangements, and I have one florist that I work with who is obsessed with like aromatic herbs in her arrangements, right? I just am completely in full sun, and I've tried for many years. The basil does well, but it's not selling in market bouquets, and it won't condition right. It doesn't matter what we seem to do. So that's getting cut from the field this year. I love using it. We're putting dill in. I think for some of that stuff, I have to say goodbye to some of those crops on my end because they're just not reaping, I think, the reward, right? Going into this year for us, it's really thinking about what is actually profitable for the farm and less of what am I growing just because I love it, right? We love ranunculus. We love a good ranunculus. I can sell ranunculus till the cows come home, but not for the price that I want for it. And that's really frustrating, right? Is we're still in a position, I think, where even with the like validity of having a retail store, there's still, I think, a stigma behind, oh, these were just grown outdoors. And flower farmers put so much work and energy into their farms and into their gardens that it's not just a flower that was grown outdoors. And I get a ton of questions too about like whether or not I can sell my ranunculus corms to people. I can't. We order from a company where we, sign a waiver that says we're not going to resell this product. And the reason that those sorts of things exist is to protect the large agricultural growers. Like we can't all have access to everything. But I also think that that's part, like the floral industry, the design, the florists, it does all kind of like work together that way. And we can have moral conversations about whether it's right that people are like patenting certain things and whether you should, because we had this whole thing with Cozy Town, right? And patents work very different in Canada. So I should also like preface this by saying where you can patent, I think it's the tuber. You can't patent like the bloom specifically that comes from the tuber, right? So once that flower blooms, you can take seed from it and do whatever you want with that flower. But like you can't necessarily like resell the dahlia tuber. It's the same thing with a lot of corms, right? The clone series of ranunculus, those corms are supposed to be destroyed after every year because of the patents that are on those corms. It's to help keep that flower a little bit more exclusive. But on the moral side of it, should we really be patenting nature? And as we kind of move into this like we're going to call it what it is, corporate oligarchy, and like, these conversations that we have around with like Monsanto, oh my gosh, words, you know what I'm talking about, seed companies, right? We've gone from having so much biodiversity in seed to having very little. And it's part of that protects like the corporations with the C's, part of that also in the floral industry at least protects the breeders. It protects the florists that are using, you know, specific varieties of flowers that aren't necessarily available. But then you're also getting this like huge influx of designers as well that want those garden blooms, right? And I think that's part of why those fillers, I've talked about feverfew on my channel before. Feverfew is one of my most profitable crops on the farm because I will bring, no joke, probably like 20 bunches of feverfew to the wholesaler during the height of the season, and they will move all of it within a couple days, and I'll need to bring 20 buckets more. I now have 6 different rows, various rows of feverfew with like 250 to 300 plants in every row that are perennialized now into the ground, that come back every year, and every year they come back, they're bushier, they're giving me more stems. I will never get rid of feverfew, regardless of how anybody feels about the smell of it, because when you get those little tiny like mini daisy chamomile blooms, looking blooms in the springtime and like the early summer, it is the perfect dainty little bloom for a bud vase. We do so much with feverfew. Tulips on the wholesale side. So this is a question I think needs to be talked about with tulips, right? When you are ordering tulips as a small scale grower, you are spending anywhere between like 35 cents a bulb to like almost $1 a bulb, depending on whether it's a double or a single, whether it's a Darwin series, whether it's specialty, whether it's, you know, in the Rembrandt series words. You are not going to recoup that cost fully when you sell it to a wholesaler. So right now, if I'm purchasing a single tulip from my wholesaler, we are purchasing tulips at 90 cents a stem, right? So it cost me $9 to purchase a bunch of tulips. If I was to buy that bulb specifically, because we grow some of the same types of bulbs, if I were to purchase that bulb, that specific bulb was costing me 40 cents, right? So if I'm selling that to the wholesaler, the maximum amount I'm probably getting for that is 50 cents a stem, so that they can then mark it up for their deliveries so that they can get the money that they need in order to pay their staff and their gas and all of the things that they're doing. That bulb price is now going up between like 70 cents usually in the spring to like the height of the season to 90 cents to $1-ish for a single tulip. But then you have Walmart, who brings in, and the Superstore, which is like the closest thing would be like a Trader Joe's, probably, like for my American friends, the Royal Canadian Superstore, the whole like President's Choice series. They bring tulips already into the grocery store already, and they're selling them for less than what I'm getting them for wholesale, right? They're terrible quality because none of them have been recut and watered, and you get all of that additional like care with a florist. But the reality is that tulips are really difficult to sell. Even the tulips that are growing at the farm. The majority of the tulips that I am growing at the farm, we've almost moved exclusively over to a lot of singles this year, because I can bunch those singles up and move them off to my wholesaler and at least break even on those tulips, rather than letting them go to waste in the fridge, or not sell them because I can't get the $3.50 a stem at a retail pricing for that tulip that I should be getting as a florist, right? The tulips that I do grow as doubles are tulip doubles that I know my wholesaler will purchase. This year, Easter falls, thank God, this year Easter falls in the middle of April. So we're not going to see a whole host of tulips not make it to their final destinations. But like I'm growing doubles this year that I know will move. Whites, pinks, apricots, and like some yellows. We're not mucking around anymore with all of these like super interesting specialty varieties that we've never grown, because I want to focus on the tried and true ones. I want to focus on the ones that I know I can move through my store, and the ones that I know, like even if I'm paying, 90 cents to $1 a bulb for that tulip, because some of the parrot tulips are that much money, right? They're not cheap tulips. And I think tulips are only going to get more expensive as bulbs, especially depending on what, changes with fuel costs, and also with, the climate changing for the Netherlands as well. Like there's been a lot of conversations with that. So tulips are an interesting one where like before they're like the epitome of spring. And now it's becoming more and more difficult to be able to sell that many tulips for that cheap. They're great because you can get them to last usually for like 6 to 8 days in a vase. But am I actually making the money back on those that I have put into them after the labor and the storage and the, the hydro? It's one of those things where I very frequently call them a loss leader for me, because while I don't necessarily make a ton of money on tulips, they're kind of the start of the local flower season, and that's what gets people back into the store. They get me into Mother's Day. They get me through Easter and into Mother's Day and get people thinking about all of the local beauty that is coming up with the flower season, right? And like on that note, I don't actually find dahlias anymore to be a particularly profitable crop either, right? Everybody's growing dahlias. Dahlias are the it. They're just the it crop to grow for so many years that the whole market is entirely oversaturated and everybody has dahlias in their garden. So like I said, we're moving to dahlias that I can grow and sell and use for events for myself, for the florists that we stock, because that's the only way I'm not going to be making money off of all of the like 75 different varieties of dahlias that I grow. And it just realistically takes up way too much space in the field. And they're way too labor intensive. They require staking, and they require, extra feeding, and they require being strawed and weeded so much. And it's just the manpower behind those in order to get them to a point where I'm making what I need to make per stem off of the dahlia is just like, it's not there. And so focusing on like higher productivity version, like more higher productive varieties of dahlias and kind of culling out the rest is just kind of going to be what I focus on for the next 2 years, because we're not going to mess around and find out later. It is not 2025, I think, for a lot of businesses is just not the year to do that. And I mean that in the store as well. I know what works. I know what my customers are coming in for. I know the price points that they're looking to spend. This is not the year for me to go around and start changing things. The biggest change we made this year was we redesigned the store layout. This first week we were back in the shop, and I swapped from doing craft paper to like newsprint wrapping for a white wrap as opposed to the craft paper, simply because I'm finding as more and more small flower farmers are around me, the branding is getting lost. And so changing over to a different wrap style, kind of going with something that's more of like a Korean style wrap. And I'm going to show you guys, I want to do that video because I want to show you the different ways you can wrap different types of flowers. But making that switch then for us, I think has been really instrumental because of like brand recognition. But I'm not changing my growing practices. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to mess around with crops that I don't know I can grow. That's what last year was for, right? Like last year was the year we added in the campanula, we added in the nigella, we did the buplurum, we trialed the bells of Ireland again. We really looked at profitability on Potomac snapdragons for us, because snapdragons is one of the products I purchase the most of in the store. So I can take that entire crop and supplement that with things that I can grow myself. Not only am I saving myself money, but I'm getting a good local product that I have my heart and soul into, in varieties that I can't necessarily get at the wholesale shop, right? Lysianthus is a great example as well. Here, where I am in Southwestern Ontario, I am purchasing Lysianthus for $2.20 a stem, wholesale, right? It's probably cheaper to go get it direct from the market. But the nice thing about having a wholesaler that's so local to me is that I don't have to drive back and forth from Toronto 2 days a week. I'm paying them for that service that they do as a part of, their business. But Lysianthus is like, it is $2.20 a stem. And it's not like the super roughly like growers Lysianthus that we're used to seeing that's coming from Johnny's. It's your very basic white Lysianthus, the dark purple Lizzie, and then sometimes pink is available with like the rim on it, like the white and then the pink with the rim. It's not, a ton of different like variety options. And so part of what sets us apart, and I've talked about this before, the only other like real floral shop, there's another one that focuses mostly on events. She's kind of like hooked in with the local bridal store that she's a sister. She's not into the everyday floristry thing. The only other like everyday open like 6 to 7 days a week florist that's doing all the arrangements is they're a Forest of Flowers. And Forest of Flowers, for those of you who are not in Canada, is a huge corporate floral shop that has franchises throughout different cities in Canada. And their entire like business is basically like McDonald's, right? You go into any McDonald's and you're going to get, you know, a double cheeseburger the exact same way, the exact same ingredients in every single place. And that is their strength. But it also means that when it comes to interesting textures and design, I am getting the clients that want something that is more inspired by nature. So figuring out ways to incorporate that design style into the off season is I think really been a challenge, but it's been an interesting challenge. I'm really starting to fall in love with lilies. I know lilies. I may never grow lilies because lily beetle is really bad around here. Lilies grow very well in covered greenhouses, and they do often do better here from like in the winter season. I'm falling in love with lilies because it's a really beautiful focal option that's like Canadian grown, and Gerbera daisies. There is a grower who is like about 2 hours away from us that grows some of the most beautiful Gerbera daisies. And they're all local. Like I would still consider that local for me because it's within like Southwestern Ontario. So what I'm trying to do, we're kind of working on in the store is two things. One, with the additions of our greenhouse, we are lucky that we are still able to have things like we didn't dig up our anemones this year. We've just let them go and they are back up and they're currently covered with frost cloth because my hope is that we're going to have anemones starting. They've been putting up buds for a while. We're going to have our anemones going within the next like probably 3 weeks. Ranunculus are also, we fall planted our ranunculus this year. When I order my ranunculus, I actually order for 2 years at a time. So because I wanted to trial for 2020, for 2025. So this year I wanted to put the ranunculus in the fall and really trial the ranunculus to see how that would go into the early spring. Now this year, the winter's been a lot colder than last year. And so again, we've had to, mitigate a little bit and like make sure everything stayed alive. Staying alive. But like, yeah, it's just everything's, changing for us. And I think too, what I've realized since opening the flower shop, working with the flower farm, we sell surprisingly less of our own flowers in July and August than we do on like the curbsides of the season, right? Spring is our biggest time of year and fall is our biggest time of year with Thanksgiving. I don't see nearly the sales that we saw on like our regular cut flowers when we first started, where we were doing our markets kind of like not as energetic as it used to be. And like we're seeing a lot of the older farmers start to retire. So like traffic at the market isn't as great as it used to be. And even though I'm sitting right outside of my store, it's still not what it was when we first started, like to the tune of probably when we started out, we were doing, $1,200 to $1,500 in sales at the market back in 2019, 2020, 2021, because people were hungry for local flowers, right? Now, with kind of like the shift, I think back into, what the economy looked like and how the people's buying habits before the pandemic. And again, this might change this year, right? Because the whole different like trade outlook for 2025. But really in the last 2 years, I've seen, instead of pulling in like $1,000 to $1,200 mornings at a market, I'm seeing $500, $400. Part of that is people just not having the amount of money to spend that they used to. And some of that, I think, is just the farmers market's vibes itself are just not what they used to be, as like the farmers are starting to retire. But that doesn't mean that like my shop sales are going down. And so like while it's all like balancing out at the end, I can say absolutely for certain that I am not selling nearly as much actual farm grown flowers as bouquets at my farmers market as I used to. And so for me, like on the planning end of the business, I'm looking at where then are the sales for me. And I honestly think that answer is not necessarily like fully wholesale. I don't know yet if we're in a position where I'm going to have enough stems to bring out to like the Ontario flower growers. But having my wholesaler that I can offload stems to is a great option. Connecting with other like local florists is a great option. And then being able to like put a price on my stems from the farm and technically like sell them to myself as the business so that I can figure out that markup as well. Is like really important. So like a lot of the conversations that I'll have with my floral wholesaler, he'll pick up like buckets, like 3 or 4 buckets of flowers on a morning on his way out to do his things. And I will get like, so basically we do it on kind of a consignment thing, which is really helpful, but also like because I'm also purchasing from them, they just like reduce my bill, right? So it works great that way. So when I see like what he is like taking so like zinnias, I will sell to him for like $9 for 10 stems of zinnias to the wholesaler. So he's getting like Bennery Giants for 90 cents a stem, reselling those to the florist for like $1.30 to $1.50 so that they're getting their markup. But some of the stuff I'll get in, so like 20 bachelor's buttons. All right, what's the going rate at the OGF, right? What is the going rate in Toronto? I will match that, because otherwise my product on their truck becomes overpriced. It becomes beyond what the actual going rate is for that specific flower. And so like bachelor's buttons, you put 20 of them in a bunch and I'm getting $7 for those. Okay, that's fine. But then I have to know what the stem pricing is on those, and I need a full list from him so that I know what to resell them at with my markup in my store. Because we still have to do all of the same stuff that they do, right? Like we're still bringing those flowers in. I still have to unpack them, you quick dip them, you process them, you put them in your cooler, you let them rehydrate. Like those steps that every florist does when they get flowers are still happening. It's just that instead of going into that middleman, they're going directly from our farm to our farm cooler where they do their like first hydration. And then they come from our farm cooler and they go either to my wholesaler, they go to the florist, or they come to our shop. And so like in every step, we still need to know what the pricing is. And so I always have a good chuckle when I talk to them every year. And I'm like, all right, what's the straw flower going for this year? Because I need to know like what I should be selling that for if I'm putting it in an arrangement. And so having that kind of like really like just open conversation has been really helpful with them as well, because it's given me, I think, a lot of guidance as to what I should be expecting to sell my stems for. And I think that it can be really difficult if you are thinking about selling into a wholesale market to realize that you're going to be getting a lot less for that specific flower stem than you think you will be, right? And if you're only charging, $1 a Bennery like giant Bennery giant zinnia in your actual like flower bouquet that you're selling at the markets or selling off of your own little farm stands, when your florist is paying $1.20 to $1.30, like the next florist in your hometown is paying $1.20 to $1.30 from a wholesaler for that stem, you're actually undercutting the florist, right? So my general rule of thumb with farmers market, and this is something I kind of started doing back in 2013, and I think this is, or 2023, and I think this has been a really good system. My markup for in-shop floral, so this is fully designed in a vase, the things that we're taking, 15 to 40 minutes in order to create that piece, not event work, but just regular markup. I typically look at about a 3 times to a 3.5 times markup, vase inclusive. I have a formula that I use for that, I will just spiel it off so you can write it down if you want to. But essentially, you take the cost of the vase, you multiply that by 2 because that would be the hard goods cost. And then you take the cost of the flowers and you multiply it by 3. So like the wholesale cost of the flowers, multiply it by 3. That gets you your retail markup. You add those two numbers together. That should be the cost of your arrangement. I incorporate my labor cost into the flower cost. And so some florists you're going to see like will, make the markup on the labor percentage after. I just round it up because I don't like doing math. So that's how that happens. And so that's how you get like the pricing, like for the rose vase arrangement, that's how we get to that pricing. For farmers markets, I mark my pricing up ×2 as opposed to ×3. And there's no hard good pricing because I incorporate the prices of my elastic bands and my paper, really, because those are the only hard goods that are going into that, just into that markup. I deduct that from that full markup at this point. When I started, I was doing all of that math individually, and now it's just a straight 2 times. And I work backwards. So if I'm selling a bouquet at the farmer's market for $20 and I know that I have to first deduct sales tax off of that, right? Which is 13% here, it leaves me with like $17.70 in like product at retail pricing. Divide that by 2, that's your stem price. That's it. That's all we do. And then once you figured out whatever the stems are supposed to be going for, like wherever you are, and honestly talk to a florist. It's really not that difficult to figure out because most florists are running between like a 2.5 to 3.5 markup anyways, just for individual stems. All you have to do is just like do a little like multiplication math, figure that out, and you should have what they paid for like that stem pricing. Or go to your Walmart or your Trader Joe's because chances are that's actually really close to what the stem pricing is at a wholesale because those stems are already like a few days old by the time they're getting there, whereas the stuff your florist is getting is like super duper fresh, right? So like there's some workarounds on that, and I think it's really important to note that like not everything is the same price everywhere, right? So dahlias right now, I mean, I can't get dahlias right now, but I think everybody speaks dahlia. Dahlias at a wholesale price are $2 a stem for like a Cornell bronze dahlia. That's what you pay wholesale. And that's $2 Canadian. That's in Southwestern Ontario. Again, might be different out in Vancouver. It's probably going to be different down in Florida. You guys are like the hub of the floral, like North American floral universe. And so then I know if I'm going to multiply that by 3, that dahlia price has to be $6 a stem if it's going into a bouquet. And so you have to think as well, what costs am I able to like, or what flowers am I able to use? It's my focal. What are the ones that are going to be more filler? And they tend to be filler because they're a little less expensive. But even then, some of your line filler flowers like larkspur, delphinium is a great example. I've talked about delphinium on the channel before. Like some of those are still also, anywhere for us from $1.70 a stem to $2.50 a stem, depending on the time of year. I pay for ranunculus anywhere from $3.75 a stem wholesale to $5 a stem wholesale, depending on whether it is like the Cloney series, the Elegant series. And then as the local stuff starts to come on and during the season, the price goes down, right? Because that's the benefit of having that local market. And so for myself personally, when I'm pricing my stems into my store, I try to stay consistent as much as possible with what I am selling them to the wholesaler and what the price that they're going to charge the florist is, so that I'm not also undermining and undercutting the florists around me. However, that's also where a grading system comes in for your blooms. And so for me, I'm not sending my like A grade flowers to the farmer's market. I'm sending the ones that might have a little smidgen of bug damage, or like, they might not be exactly perfect. My perfect ones are going to my wholesaler before they're even going to my store, because that's a relationship to me that is incredibly important. And I want the other florist to look at the blooms I'm growing and be like, yes, right? It doesn't, not to say that the stuff I'm bringing into my store isn't grade. It's not still like an A grade, but it's more like an A- grade as opposed to like the A+ grade, right? Whereas the stuff that I'm selling out at the farmer's market may not be the stuff that I'm going to send out to my wholesaler. You might have a zinnia that's like a little further along. It's bloomed a little further, whereas I'm going to send a zinnia that's just not bloomed quite as far along. It still passes the shaky test, but like it's less old as far as its like plant growth than the ones that are going into like the farmer's market bouquet, because you're dealing with event floral, you're dealing with weddings, you're dealing with corporate events. You have a lot of these florists that are doing like very pricey, heavy hitting like event work, and so you have to make sure that those blooms that are going into that are stellar. I put the best blooms that I grow every single year into my weddings because those customers are paying for that experience. They're paying for that. You can see the cat. They're paying for that luxury, and they're paying for that quality, right? So you have to, I think, when you're pricing, if you are selling your flowers, really keep in mind as to like which market it's going into, because they're not all equal. That was a lot of work. That was a lot of talking. Class has been in session. Hoping my favorite few and newly planted mums return. Snowless winter. Oh no. Oh no. I mean, I personally think feverfew is a lot hardier than people give it credit for, but you said you're in 5B, which I think is more north than me. So I mean, good. I hope so. I find that giving feverfew like a really good haircut in the spring, just take all that dead crap off. They come back better than you think that they will. My husband has fully perennialized mums that he got at garden center 4 years ago into our front gardens, and he's never mulched them. I have faith. And if not, there's always next year, right? Like that's the wonderful thing about plants, is there's always next year. It's very, I think, easy to, look at your failures in what you're growing and get really, really stressed out because, that didn't work. But I also think you have to give yourself a little bit of grace, because there is, the learning experience that comes with that. And it does, just because it didn't work at this specific time doesn't mean it won't ever work, right? My snapdragon journey is a great example of that, where we grew beautiful snapdragons the first year, terrible snapdragons the second year, cut them completely out of the garden, the farm in 2023, brought them back last year with a vengeance. And this year I'm actually excited to grow them again because I've learned so much about like their life cycle, their bloom cycle, when and how I think to pinch them properly. And not learning not to pinch them all, right? Because I actually do like having that first center stem. Realizing stuff like Lisianthus is a lot hardier than I think we all give it credit for. My friend Caroline fully has perennialized her Lisianthus in her greenhouse, which I think is awesome. And I'd like to learn how to do that. And I do agree that people seem to be visiting farmers markets for the fancy baked goods, their vegetables. And I find that the farmers markets, so in Canada, farmers markets, in order to be considered a farmers market, have to have 51% farmed goods. So whether it's flowers, produce, dairy, like food production, honey, baked goods, things like that, it has to be like made food related items. And so we're also starting to see a lot of farmers markets that are having more crafters in the market, which is great, but it's also kind of deterring that percentage. And so our farmers market isn't actually a farmers market anymore, and it hasn't been a farmers market for a number of years. It operates under a special events license. And so we're starting to see more crafters like come into that market. You're seeing, and the farmers just generally retiring. You're seeing kind of the traffic change along with that. There's a huge shortage of people growing vegetables. I think just generally where I live, there's, the people that we grow, like the farm that we grow on, they are retired vegetable farmers, right? They have all the infrastructure because they are retired. Because during COVID, they had flowers, and so I didn't have enough room to grow all the flowers at the Green Door Gardens plot. So Laura have some room. But like as some of those older farmers that are, and I mean older, their retirement age, are stepping away from the business, currently the cost of land and purchasing of an actual like farm is just so astronomical where I am in Southwestern Ontario that it is like it's not feasible for young people to get into farming, right? We wouldn't be able to do this without the kindness of the farmers that we like, the kindness and generosity of the farmers that we grow at. Even to like rent cooler space, trading services for like land. So they have, wedding age children. We keep doing weddings and we basically just keep, deducting it off the bill until we get to the point where we have to start paying them rent. And then we'll pay them like the rent for like the land at market value. But I also think that it's, there's another local couple that are close to ours. Mulberry Moon Farm is their business. If you look them up on Facebook, on Instagram, young family, really wonderful. They're farming alongside their parents and kind of living collectively together in the house. And it's really the only way to do it because I've seen young farmers close up their farm shops. There was another one who was like probably 10 minutes away from where our farm is. And him and his partner, him and his wife, no, I think they're still, anyways, she's also a florist. So that's kind of a cool one, but he's no longer growing. They closed the farming side of that, which I think is really interesting. Some of the young farmers that I originally started doing the farmers markets with are no longer growing. And then some of the older established farms, like they're at the point now where they're not growing anymore. And it's more cost effective for them to bring Ontario produce in that's grown, 2 hours away from like the food market here to resell at the farmers market than it is to actually do the work of being a food farmer. And I do think like flowers, the burnout for flower farmers is also like heavy. I think we went through a phase of younger women who got a floret book for Christmas and thought, hey, we can do this. And I mean, I started this before floret. So like that book taught me a lot in my second year of doing this, but it wasn't necessarily the catalyst for why I got into flower farming. But I do think that there's a, young group of women that are all kind of around my age who during COVID started growing flowers and either took that business and really developed it into a substantial and like useful business. You see a lot of those across across the YouTube. It's, I think, a huge part of the community is women who have those same stories, right? But I also think that there was an underestimation of just how much work it is to do this truly profitably. That distinction between this is a full-time job and a full-time income is not the same as, doing this as a hobby, right? And like for me, I think it's pretty evident with the amount of subscribers that I have that if you're watching this and you're not subscribed, please subscribe, like the video, all that kind of normal stuff. But like, I think it's pretty evident that for me with the YouTube channel, like this isn't my main source of income. I don't do YouTube to pay bills, right? But I do flower farm to pay my bills and to support our family. And it can be incredibly isolating and incredibly difficult. And I'm not scared, I think, to talk about the industry as a whole is in a hard spot right now. The flowers, vegetables, farming, all of it, I think, is in a really difficult spot. And I think that the governance of the world right now is making it incredibly difficult and incredibly isolating. But I also think that we just didn't do a good job of actually having the conversations about how much real work it is. Because we all seek that like very perfect floral gardens, right? But farming is messy and it's not perfect. And the fields never look like Instagram worthy. And there's always weeds. And it doesn't really matter how much you do. There's always going to be more. And sometimes you just have to take the losses because it's at a point where you can't do any better than what you've done. Life throws a curveball at your way, or bug pressure comes in and takes out a crop, or you have like a random bunch of dara that just decides it's going to eat itself one year. You may grow a perfect seedling and then not have it survive properly. And I think that it's incredibly difficult to find proper balance because flowers really are an obsession, right? There is a lot of florists and people in this industry that I've started to come across realizing that we're all a little neurodivergent. And, we hyperfixate on that, like that beauty and that aspect, and incessantly creative people that are part of this industry. I think that's our superpower, but I also think it makes it really easy for us to burn out. And I think every year I get to the point in the fall when we hit into wedding season, and all of my energy and all of my creative capacity has just gone into 16 weddings that I forget to show up for the community because I just don't have it in me. Part of self-care for me this year was resetting up. You can, right? Hate mirrors. There we go. Resetting up my sewing studio like behind me, because that's something I find a lot of personal joy in. I love quilting and I love sewing and I love making bags and I just love creating and finding an outlet for that that's not only the flowers. I think has been a challenge, but it's also been really good. And so I encourage you, if you're here, if you're just starting your journey, if you are deep into your journey, if you're growing for business, balance is key. But for a lot of you, I think your gardening is your respite, right? And because you're working other jobs, and I think that's great. I think that's really, really great that is where your creative outlet is. For those of us who do this all day, every day, full time, it's a lot. It's a lot to kind of like come in as your like full self all the time and have to like be on it all the time. Flower farming is a bit of an interesting one because you don't get to have an off day. And in the summertime, it's a 7-day-a-week job. It's not something that you can relax. And so finding ways to also have, those moments of peace and doing things that you love on top of it for self-care, super duper important. And Serena did a great video on, I think, that too, and her journey with that. I watched it and I loved it. And I've never empathized with anything more. And my cat is incredibly annoying. She doesn't want to be picked up. She just wants to yell at me. So anyways, super open for the next live. I don't know when that'll be. I'm hoping to do these like once a month. Maybe we'll do a recap after Valentine's Day. Otherwise, it's always a pleasure. I love just sitting here and chatting. I hope you guys enjoy this. It feels weird sometimes just like talking to a screen and like sometimes maybe seeing some live chat stuff coming up, but enough if you stayed that it must be interesting. So I thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Obviously, if there's anything you want content on, please let me know. Otherwise, my goal this year for this channel is to just show up. We're going to be here. So that is it for the day. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend or week or day or whenever it is that you're watching the live stream. Have a great one. Bye, guys.